Hello everybody, and thanks for watching NorCal Slot Car Scene. Last week I did a preview video on the MRSLOTCAR Shadow DN4. Everybody that watched the video, or those of you that have purchased the car, I think we all agree that this is definitely in contention for Slot Car of the Year. After I finished that video, it was time to work on setting the car up for the last race of the Silicon City Speedway CanAm class. Silicon City is a 4-lane non-magnet wood track, and in the CanAm class in the past, it's been dominated by the Thunderslot cars. The modifications that I did to the Shadow were very similar to what I would do with a Thunderslot CanAm car. Here's a list of the parts and the modifications that I did, and let's take a little bit closer look at all of the modifications to transform the Shadow into a CanAm race car. The first change I made was to the motor. The 25K Predator motors run extremely well on the Silicon City Speedway, and that's what I have in my Thunderslot, so that's what I chose for this car. The next change I made was the gearing. There's nothing wrong with the stock gearing from MRSLOTCAR, but the gear sits a little bit below the chassis, and so I went to a smaller diameter spur gear to allow the car to sit lower with the tires that I was going to use. Because I went to the smaller diameter spur gear, I had to go to a little bit larger diameter pinion. So the combination here is a 16.8, actually an angle winder gear, a 16.8 millimeter, and a 7.5 millimeter pinion gear. And the mesh is not quite right, but it worked quite well. After the race, I asked Chris Walker on a Worldwide Slot Car Chat if there was a better gear combination, and he mentioned that a Thunderslot gear actually is 17 millimeters and meshes perfectly and gives me the ground clearance that I want. So I'll be changing that out in the future. The next modification was to the guide, and you really can't change the guide because it's very unique to this car because of the low nose of the Shadow. I did take it apart and check for any burrs in the plastic and then reassemble it. When I reassembled it, I changed the braid out to NSR ultra-thin braid. The ultra-thin braid allows the car to sit slightly lower and makes good contact with the track. The wheel and tire choice is my standard setup for Silicon City Speedway and most of the wood tracks in Northern California. It's NSR 5018 wheels and 5109 Ultra Grip rear tires. The tires were glued to the wheels and then trued down to approximately 18.7 millimeters to give me the clearance of 32 thousandths that's required in Northern California. I knew from my Thunderslot cars that I would have to add a little bit of weight to the motor pod, so I added about 6 to 8 grams right in front of the motor. In the front, I added about 1.5 grams as close to the guide as I could get it. I used the stock front wheels and tires, glued the tires to the wheels, and then trued them till they were round. The last tuning modification I did is to put some strapping tape underneath the chassis to tie the front of the motor pod to the chassis. On our tracks in Northern California, this just tends to tighten the car up and give it a little bit more grip, and I use it most of the time. I was able to get to Silicon City Speedway the day before the race to test the car, and after running it, I really didn't make any changes at all to the basic setup. It ran extremely well, and it was about 1/10 of a second off my fastest Thunderslot car. When it came time for the race, it was my Shadow against 12 Thunderslot cars and 1 Carrera car. In the race, Ian Douglas was on a winning pace with his Thunderslot car, but ran into a problem, and in the end, my Shadow came out on top, and we won the race. When you look at the fast lap times for the race, I was less than 1/10 of a second off of Ian's Thunderslot. We all know that the Shadow DN4 is one of the best looking slot cars to come along in a long time. And now with a few modifications, it's able to run with the fastest Thunderslot cars in the very competitive CanAm class in NorCal Slot Car wood track racing. So there you have it. I definitely think the Shadow DN4 from MRSLOTCAR is my vote for Slot Car of the Year. Thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene, and we'll see you at the races.